Would you pay over £100 for a gaming surface? What if I told you that you'd never need to replace it again and it wouldn't wear down? What if I told you it had little to no friction so you can make extremely fast movements easier? What if I told you you'd be a professional gamer within a matter of weeks? Okay, that last one is clearly not true, but I do introduce you to the SKYPAD 3.0 XL. This particular version cost £115. So that's roughly $136, but it's also huge, measuring at 400 by 500 millimeters, way bigger than the surface it's based on. If you're old enough, you may remember a gaming surface called IceMat. It was made by SteelSeries, and the brand is now over 20 years old. What made it so special? Well, it was a surface made out of glass. Eventually, though, SteelSeries stopped making them in favor of cloth mats. I absolutely loved my IceMat, and it was the only surface I used for a long time. That wasn't until I dropped it on some kitchen tiles one day when I was cleaning it, and I couldn't get a replacement. I eventually transitioned to a QCK Heavy, and that's where I stayed ever since. Fast forward to today, and I came across SKYPAD, a surface that is absolutely inspired by that IceMat from all those years ago. And then the desire once again to move back to a glass surface was just too much to resist. I've been using this now for, I'd say, just over a month. And I suppose the big question is, why? Why would you want to have a glass surface in the first place? Well, the main reason is resistance, or lack thereof, really. No matter what surface you use, let's say plastic or cloth, there is always going to be an element of resistance. Now, over time, you just get used to it, and you don't really notice it anymore. A glass mouse mat, or a plastic one, just gives you a much smoother surface for faster mouse movements. The downside is, though, that you have less control, because the surface itself offers little to no resistance. If you watch me pushing my mouse around, it really does glide without much force. Just a little touch, and it will actually go quite far. That's because the surface itself has no resistance. This means that when you're controlling your mouse, especially when you're controlling recoil and the finer movements, it is entirely down to you rather than the surface itself. If you're using a cloth mat, that resistance will slow you down when you're trying to track a target. But on something like this, it's all down to you and your wrist control. Some people will love that, and others will hate it. It is not the surface for everyone. I think I was just wanting to recapture memories of my youth. I imagine there's a few questions you have about a glass surface. First of all, how do you keep it clean? Well, anything that cleans glass will clean this. I actually have a pack of window lean wipes, streak-free, of course, and I just give it a wipe down regularly. Cloth mats do tend to get quite dirty over time, and it's pretty much unavoidable. Even little bits of fluff and other things can get stuck in the weave. And when I used a QCK Heavy, I tended to buy a new one fairly regularly. Especially when I'd go to a LAN event, I would just buy a brand new one and get that new feel. And you really noticed how much faster it was compared to the used one. You could also pop them in the washing machine if you weren't too worried about fraying the ends. And if you use a plastic surface, well, they're also really easy to clean. I'd love to directly compare how this SKYPAD feels to the IceMat from all those years ago. My memory just isn't that good. It certainly feels similar to me, at least to my limited recollection, but I personally just love the speed of it. I'm not an aiming god, but I get by with my aim. But when I got this mat, it just felt right. But like I say, it's not going to be for everyone. If you use a fast sensitivity, then maybe this is the sort of pad that would suit you for those really fast flicks. But if you want more control, and let's say you use a slower sensitivity, then maybe this isn't the one. I felt I had better minor adjustment with the SKYPAD, those really small precision movements, than I did with my QCK Heavy. But perhaps my recoil control was worse to begin with. I do think there's a bit of a trade-off there, but you can get some of that control back with practice. The big sticking point here is price. Like I said, this version is 400 by 500 millimeters, which you may not think is that large if it was a cloth mat, but this is a large piece of glass. So having a piece of glass that size is why it's so expensive. There is a smaller version, which comes in at £96, which is roughly $113. And that version is 300 by 350 millimeters. Again, both of those are way bigger than the IceMat that I had all those years ago. And it's an awful lot of money for a mouse surface. They're Amazon prices though, so it may differ for you based on your region. I suppose it really boils down to how often you change your surface. If you were like me and every 18 months to 2 years, you'd probably get a new QCK Heavy for £25–30. Then maybe if you kept this SKYPAD for 4 or 5 years, which you could easily do if you keep it in good condition, and it's not going to wear, then maybe it's worth it. But it's still a huge initial investment. Now, I mentioned how easy it is to keep the mat clean, but that's also a negative because you have to do it regularly. The downside to having a hard surface, and this is the same on a plastic mat, but especially on this one, any little bit of grit, dirt can get stuck underneath your mouse or on the mat itself, and it gives you this really awful scratchy sound. You know, you could tell that something is underneath, and you have to keep on top of that. Not only, obviously, can it mess up your mouse aim, but likewise, it can cause you problems with scratching, and you really don't want that. There are a few other things to consider as well. A lot of people swap out their mouse feet on their mice because they can wear down. And if you're using a hard surface, well, they're likely going to wear down more. So regular use on a hard surface, especially the SKYPAD, means you're likely going to have to replace those mouse feet fairly frequently to get a smooth glide. Likewise, if you use a cloth mousepad, there are loads of options for your mouse feet that you can use for a really smooth glide. There are even glass mouse feet that you can use on most of the well-known mice. And that might be an alternative, certainly a cheaper one, to getting a hard glass surface that would offer you something fairly similar. Wrapping up, I love the SKYPAD, and this is going to be my main surface now for a long time, but it's not for everyone. Not only is it not for everyone, it has a very high price that maybe a lot of people aren't willing to pay.